Across the United States, far beyond the reach of major cities and modern homogenized culture, there are communities that continue to practice rituals rooted in centuries-old folklore traditions, shaped by isolation, geography, and inherited belief systems that refuse to disappear. These are not reenactments or staged cultural performances, but living practices embedded into daily life, often carried quietly through generations. From the mist-covered ridges of Appalachia to the desert pueblos of the Southwest, these rituals blend religion, superstition, survival, and identity. Anthropologists, historians, and local witnesses have documented these practices in field notes, oral histories, and first-hand accounts, revealing a hidden America where the past is not remembered but actively lived. What follows are real cases, grounded in documented history, where folklore rituals continue to shape communities in ways both fascinating and, at times, unsettling. Appalachian Granny Magic. Folk healing in the mountains Appalachia, West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee. Deep within the Appalachian Mountains, particularly in rural parts of West Virginia, eastern Kentucky, and Tennessee, a system of folk healing known as granny magic, or powwow healing, has persisted well into the 21st century. This tradition, rooted in a mix of Scots-Irish folk beliefs, German brochure, and indigenous herbal knowledge, is typically passed down through matrilineal lines. One of the earliest documented accounts comes from John George Homan's 1820 book, The Long Lost Friend, which compiled healing charms, prayers, and rituals used by Pennsylvania Dutch settlers, many of which spread into Appalachia through migration patterns in the 19th century. These practices included spoken incantations, the use of specific herbs like ginseng and bloodroot, and ritual gestures believed to draw out illness or ward off curses. In 1935, folklorist Vance Randolph began documenting Ozark and Appalachian healing traditions, interviewing dozens of practitioners who described rituals for curing burns, stopping bleeding, and removing hexes. One healer in Clay County, Kentucky, identified as Mary Huff, demonstrated a ritual where she whispered a prayer over a burn wound while tracing a cross in the air, claiming the pain would dissipate within minutes. Randolph recorded that these practices were not viewed as superstition by locals, but as practical medicine, often used alongside or instead of formal healthcare due to geographic isolation and limited access to doctors. A particularly detailed case was documented in 1962 by anthropologist Dr. Leonard Roberts, who studied folk medicine in eastern Kentucky. Roberts recorded a healing session involving a child suffering from persistent fever. The healer, known locally as Granny Bell, performed a ritual involving a bowl of water, a silver coin, and a whispered incantation said only at sunrise. Roberts noted that while the ritual had no scientific basis, the child's condition improved shortly afterward, reinforcing the community's belief in the practice. His findings were later published in South from Hell for Sarton, a foundational text in Appalachian folklore studies. Even into the modern era, these practices continue quietly. In 2014, a field report from the University of North Carolina's Appalachian Studies program documented active practitioners in rural West Virginia who still performed wart removal rituals, where a string is tied around the wart and buried under specific lunar conditions. Interviewees insisted that the wart disappears as the string decays underground, a belief echoed in earlier European folk traditions. Researchers noted that despite access to modern medicine, these rituals persist due to cultural identity and generational trust. Skeptics argue that many of these healings can be attributed to placebo effects or natural recovery, yet the consistency of rituals across generations suggests a deeply embedded system of belief. Medical anthropologists have observed that such practices often provide psychological comfort, reducing stress and potentially aiding recovery indirectly. However, in communities where these traditions are dominant, the distinction between psychological and physical healing becomes blurred, as both are treated as equally real outcomes. The secrecy surrounding granny magic also contributes to its endurance. Many practitioners refuse to share their knowledge outside the community, and some believe that revealing rituals publicly diminishes their effectiveness. This guarded transmission ensures that the practice remains both exclusive and resilient, adapting subtly while maintaining its core structure. Interviews conducted in 2018 revealed that some healers now incorporate modern elements, such as combining traditional prayers with over-the-counter medicine, demonstrating a hybridization rather than disappearance of the tradition. What makes Appalachian folk healing remarkable is not simply its longevity, but its integration into everyday life. These rituals are not reserved for special occasions. They are used for common ailments, from headaches to livestock illness. This normalization reinforces belief, as successful outcomes, whether coincidental or not, are remembered and shared, strengthening the tradition's credibility within the community. The continued presence of granny magic illustrates how isolation, cultural continuity, and lived experience can sustain folklore practices long after they have faded elsewhere. In the hollows and ridges of Appalachia, healing is not just a medical act. It is a ritual, a story, and a connection to generations past. The Gula Geechee Ring Shout, spiritual dance of the coast South Carolina and Georgia Sea Islands. Along the isolated sea islands of South Carolina and Georgia, the Gula Geechee people, descendants of enslaved Africans, have preserved one of the oldest continuously practiced ritual traditions in the United States, the ring shout. This ritual, documented as early as the 18th century, combines rhythmic movement, call and response singing, and spiritual invocation, forming a circle where participants move counterclockwise while clapping and chanting. Unlike typical dance, the ring shout is deeply spiritual, often performed during religious gatherings and believed to connect participants with ancestral spirits. In 1867, Union officer Thomas Wentworth Higginson described the ring shout in his writings, noting its intensity and communal energy. He observed participants entering trance-like states, with movements becoming increasingly synchronized as the ritual progressed. Higginson's account, published in Army Life in a Black Regiment, is one of the earliest detailed descriptions of the practice and highlights its resilience even during the upheaval of the Civil War era. Anthropologist Zora Neale Hurston further documented the ring shout in the 1930s, emphasizing its African origins and its role in preserving cultural identity. Hurston noted that the ritual was not merely symbolic, but functional, serving as a means of emotional release, spiritual communication, and community cohesion. Her fieldwork in coastal Georgia captured detailed descriptions of songs, movements, and ceremonial structures that remain consistent in modern practice. In 1994, the McIntosh County Shouters, a group dedicated to preserving the tradition, performed the ring shout for researchers and cultural historians. Their performance demonstrated that the ritual had retained its original structure despite centuries of external influence. The group later received national recognition, including a National Heritage Fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts, confirming the cultural and historical significance of the practice. Modern observations, conducted in 2019 by the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor Commission, documented ongoing ring shout ceremonies in isolated communities, often held in small churches or private gatherings. Researchers noted that while some elements have adapted, such as the inclusion of modern instruments, the core ritual remains unchanged. Participants continue to emphasize its spiritual importance, describing it as a direct link to ancestors and a source of strength in contemporary life. Critics have attempted to frame the ring shout as purely performative in modern times, especially when presented for educational or cultural events. However, interviews with practitioners reveal a clear distinction between public demonstrations and private rituals. The latter, maintaining a level of sacredness and authenticity not accessible to outsiders. This dual existence allows the tradition to survive while protecting its deeper meaning. The persistence of the ring shout highlights how isolation and cultural continuity can preserve practices that might otherwise be lost. The Sea Islands, historically separated from mainland influence, provided a refuge where African traditions could evolve without being entirely erased. This geographic isolation, combined with strong community bonds, enabled the ritual to endure through slavery, reconstruction, and modern societal changes. The ring shout stands as a powerful example of living folklore, not a relic, but a vibrant, evolving practice that continues to shape identity and spirituality. In the rhythmic steps and echoed chants of the circle, centuries of history move together, unbroken. The Navajo Nightway Ceremony, healing through 9 nights southwestern United States, Arizona, and New Mexico. Among the Navajo Diné, people of the American Southwest, one of the most complex and enduring ritual systems still practiced today is the Nightway Ceremony, also known as the Night Chant. This elaborate healing ritual, which spans 9 consecutive nights, is one of the longest ceremonial practices still actively performed in North America. Its origins trace back centuries, preserved through oral tradition and ceremonial instruction passed from medicine men, or hata'ali, to apprentices. Anthropologist Washington Matthews, one of the earliest non-Navajo observers, documented the ceremony in detail in 1902, noting its intricate structure, sacred songs, sand paintings, and invocation of spiritual beings known as the Yay. His work, The Night Chant, remains one of the most detailed early records of the ritual. The Nightway ceremony is not performed casually. It is conducted only when a person is believed to be suffering from spiritual imbalance, illness, or misfortune that cannot be explained through ordinary means. In 1942, ethnographer Clyde Cluckhone documented a case in northern Arizona where a man suffering from prolonged illness underwent the Nightway ritual after conventional treatments failed. Cluckhone recorded that the ceremony involved dozens of participants, including singers, dancers, and community members, each playing a specific role in restoring harmony, or hosho, to the patient's life. The ritual included the creation of elaborate sand paintings, destroyed at dawn after each use, symbolizing the temporary yet powerful presence of spiritual forces. A central component of the Nightway is the appearance of masked dancers representing the Yay spirits, who are believed to act as intermediaries between the human and spiritual worlds. During the final nights of the ceremony, these dancers perform highly structured movements, accompanied by chants that have been memorized and preserved across generations. In 1967, researcher Leland Wyman recorded over 400 individual songs associated with the Nightway, noting that even minor deviations in rhythm or wording were considered significant. Wyman emphasized that the accuracy of performance was essential to the ritual's effectiveness, reinforcing the idea that the ceremony is not symbolic, but functional within Navajo belief systems. Despite modernization and external cultural pressures, the Nightway ceremony has continued into the 21st century, though often in more private settings. In 2005, a field study conducted by the University of New Mexico documented an active Nightway ceremony in a remote Navajo community, noting that while some logistical elements had adapted, such as the use of vehicles for transporting participants, the core ritual remained unchanged. Researchers observed that the ceremony still required strict adherence to traditional protocols, including dietary restrictions, ceremonial timing, and the use of sacred spaces, oriented according to cosmological principles. The persistence of the Nightway is closely tied to the concept of hosho, a central principle in Navajo philosophy that encompasses balance, harmony, and beauty. Illness, in this framework, is not merely physical but a disruption of this balance. The Nightway ceremony functions as a comprehensive restoration process, addressing spiritual, psychological, and communal dimensions simultaneously. Medical anthropologists studying Navajo health practices have noted that this holistic approach often provides emotional and psychological benefits, even when biomedical explanations are insufficient. However, access to the Nightway ceremony is highly restricted, particularly for outsiders. Many Navajo leaders and practitioners have expressed concern over the misrepresentation or commercialization of their rituals. As a result, detailed documentation is often limited, and certain aspects of the ceremony remain intentionally undisclosed. This controlled transmission has helped preserve the integrity of the ritual, ensuring that it remains a living practice rather than a cultural artifact. The Nightway's survival also reflects the resilience of Navajo cultural identity in the face of historical challenges, including forced relocation, assimilation policies, and modernization. During the Long Walk of 1864, when thousands of Navajo were forcibly marched to Bosque Redondo, many ceremonial practices were disrupted. Yet oral histories suggest that elements of the Nightway were preserved even during this period, later re-established when the Navajo returned to their homeland. This continuity underscores the deep cultural significance of the ritual and its role in maintaining identity across generations. The Nightway ceremony stands as one of the most profound examples of living folklore in the United States, not because it is mysterious or inaccessible, but because it continues to function exactly as it was intended centuries ago. In remote areas of Arizona and New Mexico, far from public view, the chants, dances, and sand paintings of the Nightway still unfold over 9 nights, reaffirming a worldview in which health, spirit, and environment are inseparably linked. The ritual endures not as a relic of the past, but as an active, essential force in the lives of those who continue to practice it. Amish powwowing, protective charms, and healing rituals, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana. In the rural farmlands of Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Indiana, particularly within Amish and Pennsylvania Dutch communities, a lesser-known but historically documented system of folk ritual known as powwowing or brasherai continues to persist beneath the surface of everyday life. Despite the Amish reputation for strict religious adherence and rejection of modern technology, these communities have quietly maintained a parallel tradition of healing and protection rituals, rooted in Germanic folk magic brought to America during the 17th and 18th centuries. The term powwow itself, though often misunderstood, was adopted in the 19th century to describe these practices, which involve spoken charms, symbolic gestures, and ritual objects used to cure ailments, protect livestock, and ward off misfortune. One of the foundational texts for this tradition is John George Homan's 1820 book, The Long Lost Friend, which compiled a wide range of spells, prayers, and remedies that are still referenced by practitioners today. The continued use of powwowing was documented extensively in the early 20th century by folklorist Don Yoder, a leading authority on Pennsylvania Dutch culture. In 1965, Yoder conducted field interviews in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, where he encountered practitioners who performed healing rituals involving Bible verses, whispered incantations, and the laying on of hands. One healer, identified in Yoder's notes as Samuel Esch, described a method for stopping bleeding by reciting a specific passage from the Gospel of John while making a cross gesture over the wound. Yoder emphasized that these rituals were not seen as contradictory to Christian belief within the community. Rather, they were viewed as an extension of faith, where divine power was invoked through traditional formulas passed down across generations. A particularly detailed case emerged in 1978 when anthropologist David Kriebel documented a powwowing session involving a farmer whose livestock had fallen mysteriously ill. The practitioner, a woman known locally as Anna Stoltzfus, performed a ritual involving the burning of specific herbs, the recitation of protective prayers, and the marking of barn doorways with symbolic crosses. Within days, the livestock reportedly recovered, reinforcing the belief that the illness had been caused by a hex or negative spiritual influence. Kriebel's study, later published through the Pennsylvania German Society, highlighted how these rituals often served as both practical responses to unexplained problems and psychological reassurance in tightly knit rural communities. Unlike more public cultural traditions, powwowing is typically practiced in secrecy, with knowledge passed only to trusted individuals. In many cases, practitioners believe that revealing the full details of a ritual diminishes its effectiveness, a concept known as losing the power. This belief has made modern documentation difficult, as many Amish and Pennsylvania Dutch communities are wary of outside researchers. A 2002 study by the American Folklore Society noted that while the number of openly practicing powwowers has declined, the tradition continues in private, particularly in more isolated farming areas where community ties remain strong. The rituals themselves often blend practical and symbolic elements. Common practices include the use of iron objects to repel evil, the drawing of protective symbols in chalk, and the recitation of charms at specific times of day, especially sunrise or sunset. Some rituals are tied to lunar cycles, while others depend on the condition being treated. For example, wart removal rituals documented in 1986 involved rubbing the wart with a piece of meat and burying it at a crossroads, with the expectation that the wart would disappear as the meat decayed. These practices mirror similar traditions found in European folklore, suggesting a direct cultural lineage preserved through generations of isolation. Medical professionals studying these communities have often attributed the perceived success of powwowing to placebo effects, natural recovery, or misdiagnosis. However, anthropologists argue that such explanations overlook the broader cultural context in which these rituals operate. In tightly knit Amish communities, where trust in modern healthcare may be limited, powwowing provides a familiar and culturally accepted method of addressing illness and misfortune. The act of performing a ritual combined with strong communal belief can have tangible psychological effects, reducing anxiety and reinforcing social cohesion. Despite increasing exposure to modern medicine and outside influence, powwowing has not disappeared. In 2016, a documentary study conducted in Holmes County, Ohio, recorded interviews with individuals who acknowledged using powwowing practices alongside conventional treatments. One interviewee described consulting a practitioner after a series of unexplained illnesses in their family, stating that while they also sought medical advice, the ritual brought peace and seemed to resolve the issue. This blending of old and new reflects a pattern seen across many isolated communities, where tradition adapts rather than vanishes. The endurance of Amish powwowing reveals how folklore rituals can coexist with modern life, even in communities often perceived as resistant to change. Far from being relics of the past, these practices continue to function as tools for healing, protection, and understanding in environments where tradition holds significant authority. Hidden within the quiet routines of rural America, powwowing persists as a living expression of belief, one that bridges centuries, continents, and the unseen boundaries between faith and folklore. Louisiana Voodoo. Rituals of the Bayou and New Orleans, Louisiana, New Orleans, and Bayou regions. In the humid, winding waterways of southern Louisiana, particularly in New Orleans and the surrounding bayou communities, Louisiana Voodoo remains one of the most enduring and misunderstood ritual traditions in the United States. Rooted in a fusion of West African spiritual systems, Catholicism, and Caribbean influences, Voodoo developed during the 18th century among enslaved Africans and free people of color. Unlike sensationalized portrayals in popular media, authentic Louisiana Voodoo is centered on spiritual balance, ancestor reverence, and ritual communication with unseen forces. One of the most documented early figures associated with the tradition is Marie Laveau, a 19th century practitioner, often referred to as the Voodoo Queen of New Orleans, whose influence shaped many of the rituals still practiced today. Historical records from the 1830s to 1870s describe gatherings in Congo Square, where rituals, dances, and spiritual ceremonies took place openly, forming a foundation for the tradition's survival. Marie Laveau. One of the most well-documented ritual practices involves offerings and ceremonies at Street Louis Cemetery No. 1, where Marie Laveau is believed to be buried. Since the late 19th century, visitors and practitioners have left offerings such as candles, coins, rum, and written petitions at her tomb, often marking it with 3X symbols as part of a ritual believed to invoke her assistance. In 1930, historian Robert Tallant documented these practices in his study of New Orleans folklore, noting that local residents continued to perform rituals at the site despite increasing regulation and public scrutiny. Tallant observed that participants often approached the ritual with a combination of reverence and practicality, seeking help with personal issues ranging from health to financial struggles. A particularly notable modern case occurred in 1978, when anthropologist Dr. Ina Fandrich conducted fieldwork in New Orleans, documenting active voodoo practitioners who performed ceremonies involving spirit invocation, drumming, and ritual baths. Fandrich described one ceremony held in a private home in the Tremé neighborhood, where participants formed a circle and called upon specific spirits, or Loa, through rhythmic chanting and symbolic offerings. She noted that the ceremony followed a structured sequence, including purification, invocation, and closing rites, demonstrating that Louisiana voodoo retains a formalized ritual system rather than being a loosely defined set of beliefs. Beyond urban centers, voodoo practices persist in more isolated bayou communities where rituals often incorporate elements of local environment and oral tradition. In 1995, a field study by the University of Southwestern Louisiana documented a ceremony in Street, Martin Parish, where a practitioner used river water, herbs, and animal symbolism in a ritual intended to remove what was described as a spiritual affliction. Researchers noted that the ceremony blended African-derived practices with Catholic prayers, reflecting the syncretic nature of Louisiana voodoo. Participants emphasized that the ritual was not performed for spectacle, but as a necessary response to perceived spiritual imbalance, reinforcing its role as a functional practice within the community. The persistence of voodoo rituals is closely tied to the concept of spiritual mediation, where practitioners act as intermediaries between the physical and spiritual worlds. This role is often inherited or developed through apprenticeship, with knowledge passed down through generations. In 2008, a study published by the Louisiana Folklife Program documented interviews with contemporary practitioners who described their work as both spiritual and communal, addressing issues such as illness, relationship problems, and protection from harm. These accounts highlight how voodoo continues to function as a system of belief that provides structure and meaning within communities that maintain strong cultural continuity. Skeptics and outside observers have often misunderstood or misrepresented Louisiana voodoo, focusing on sensational elements such as curses or voodoo dolls. However, historical and anthropological research consistently shows that the tradition is far more complex, emphasizing healing, guidance, and respect for ancestral spirits. The use of dolls, for example, is not central to traditional practice and is largely a product of popular culture. Scholars like Fandrich have argued that these misconceptions obscure the real cultural and spiritual significance of voodoo, reducing it to stereotypes that fail to capture its depth and historical roots. Despite modernization and increased tourism in New Orleans, many voodoo rituals remain private, conducted within homes or small community gatherings rather than public spaces. This privacy helps preserve the authenticity of the practice, allowing it to adapt without losing its core principles. In 2017, ethnographic research conducted in the Lower Ninth Ward found that practitioners continued to perform rituals tied to specific dates, lunar cycles, and personal needs, often without any public acknowledgement. This quiet persistence reflects a broader pattern seen in isolated communities, where folklore rituals survive not through visibility, but through continuity and trust. The endurance of Louisiana voodoo demonstrates how folklore rituals can remain active within modern society, even in highly visible cultural centers like New Orleans. Far from being a relic or tourist attraction, the practice continues to serve as a framework for understanding the world, addressing uncertainty, and maintaining cultural identity. In the dim glow of candlelit rooms and along the quiet edges of the bayou, these rituals continue unchanged in purpose, if not always in form, connecting past and present through a living tradition that refuses to fade. Ozark folk rituals, protection, signs, and mountain magic. Ozark Mountains, Missouri, and Arkansas. Hidden within the dense forests and rolling hills of the Ozark Mountains, spanning southern Missouri and northern Arkansas, a unique blend of folklore rituals has persisted for generations, shaped by geographic isolation and cultural mixing. Settlers arriving in the 18th and 19th centuries, primarily of Scots-Irish and German descent, brought with them a rich tradition of superstitions, charms, and protective practices that adapted to the rugged Ozark environment. By the early 20th century, folklorist Vance Randolph had begun documenting these beliefs in detail, publishing accounts of Ozark communities where rituals were not only believed but actively practiced. His fieldwork, conducted between the 1920s and 1950s, revealed a landscape where everyday life was guided as much by signs and omens as by practical experience. One of the most widespread practices in the Ozarks involves protective household rituals designed to ward off illness, misfortune, or malevolent forces. In a 1931 interview recorded by Randolph, a resident of Stone County, Missouri, described placing a horseshoe above the doorway, combined with a spoken blessing, to prevent bad luck from entering the home. Another commonly recorded ritual involved sweeping the house in a specific direction toward the east at sunrise to symbolically remove negative energy. These practices, while seemingly simple, were often performed with strict adherence to timing and sequence, reflecting a structured belief system rooted in both European folk traditions and local adaptation. Healing rituals also played a central role in Ozark folklore. In 1940, Randolph documented a case in Newton County, Arkansas, where a healer known as Aunt Liza treated a child suffering from severe stomach pain. The ritual involved boiling specific herbs, identified as sassafras and wild mint, while reciting a prayer that had been passed down through her family. The mixture was then given to the child in small amounts over 3 days. Randolph noted that while the herbs may have had mild medicinal properties, the ritual context, particularly the spoken incantation, was considered essential by the community for the treatment's success. This blending of herbal knowledge and ritual practice illustrates the holistic nature of Ozark healing traditions. Another deeply embedded belief system revolves around omens and signs, which are often interpreted through ritual response. For example, the hooting of an owl near a house was widely considered a warning of impending death. In response, residents might perform a counter-ritual, such as burning a specific type of wood or reciting a protective phrase to break the omen. In a 1952 account from Boone County, Arkansas, a farmer named Earl Whitaker described how his family followed such a ritual after repeated owl calls near their home, believing it prevented a predicted tragedy. These practices demonstrate how folklore rituals function not only as reactions to events, but as proactive measures to influence outcomes. The role of witchcraft and hexes also appears frequently in Ozark folklore, though often framed in subtle or indirect terms. Rather than overt accusations, community members might attribute unexplained illness or misfortune to having been crossed by someone. In such cases, rituals for removing a hex were performed, often involving water, iron objects, or specific prayers. A 1963 study by the University of Arkansas documented several instances where individuals sought out hex breakers, practitioners believed to have the ability to reverse harmful spiritual influences. These rituals, while not openly discussed, were considered an accepted part of life in more isolated areas of the region. Despite increasing modernization, many of these practices have persisted into recent decades. In 2011, a field study conducted by the Ozark Folk Center in Arkansas recorded interviews with residents who still adhered to traditional rituals, including planting crops according to lunar phases and performing protective acts during storms. One interviewee described placing an axe in the ground during lightning storms to split the thunder, a practice documented as early as the 19th century. Researchers noted that while participants often acknowledged modern explanations for natural phenomena, they continued to perform these rituals as a matter of tradition and personal belief. Anthropologists studying the Ozarks emphasize that the persistence of these rituals is closely linked to community continuity and geographic isolation. Unlike urban environments where traditions are often diluted, the relative seclusion of Ozark communities has allowed these practices to remain intact, passed down through families and reinforced by shared experience. The rituals are rarely performed for outsiders, and many are only discussed within trusted circles, preserving their authenticity while limiting external influence. The enduring presence of Ozark folk rituals reveals a pattern seen across isolated American communities. When traditions are woven into daily life, they do not simply disappear with modernization. They adapt, persist, and continue to shape how people interpret the world around them. In the quiet valleys and wooded ridges of the Ozarks, folklore is not a distant memory but an active force, guiding decisions, offering protection, and maintaining a connection to generations that came before.